Hello, welcome to Chile Talk. I'm Neil Davidson. I am, as always, with Pete Lee, though I'm still in Argentina. He is in Chile, hence the Zoom format. We're going to talk again today about something we've already discussed, or that Pete has mainly discussed, since he is the one who knows about these things, which is the presidential candidates in the forthcoming Chilean elections, which are quite soon now. Things have moved on since we last covered this topic, and I believe, in fact, that we now do, Pete, have a definite final list of candidates, approved candidates.
Yes, we've whittled it down to a mere 7 candidates standing, but I think today we're going to talk about some of the nearly candidates and some of the not so nearly candidates as well, simply in terms of some of the rules that exist in Chile as administered by the electoral service, Serval, that have prevented some candidates taking their place.
Before we go on, just remind me exactly when this election is going to take place.
Well, the election is going to take place in November. So there will be 2 rounds. First, an open round, we call it Primera Vuelta in Spanish. All candidates who've passed through electoral scrutiny are able to run, and the leading 2 candidates, unless one of them gets more than 50% of the vote in the first round, then run off in a second round.
Okay, great. And so I believe we've had a couple of disqualifications for technical reasons, am I right?
Yes, there have been some disqualifications, not so much technical as for rather spectacular flaunting of the rules.
Okay, and I believe one of them had to do with a notary, and I think perhaps a word about notaries might be required for English-speaking listeners, because in all my years of living in Britain, I once saw a notary. I think it was down a back alley in London, and it struck me as a very Dickensian sight. Well, hardly even Dickensian, perhaps the Dickens of A Tale of Two Cities. It could have been Paris, really, a Latin culture, really, and you can imagine a brick bat flying through its window, during one of the uprisings. Now, notaries basically confirm that you are who you say you are. They're there to kind of they notarize your signature, essentially.
Yes, which I believe you can do with computers these days, and no human intervention.
That's right. But there are a lot of notaries in Chile. They're all over the place. I remember when we had the first lockdown, because with coronavirus, everything was shut except for essential businesses. And there weren't many businesses designated essential, but one was the notaries. And I remember watching on the television that there was a notary with an enormous queue outside it, people sort of huddled up against each other. It's just considered essential to the running of the country, isn't it?
Yes.
Everything must be notarized.
They are extremely well paid, or rather, it's an extremely lucrative post to have, highly controlled, often hereditary, the rights to run a notary public in Chile. And it's a very strange process because Chile, throughout its history, has always had a problem with literacy, and still does compared to other places, even compared to Argentina and Uruguay today. Notaries do things such as dictate to people passages that must be written in a person's handwriting as well as signed when, for example, buying a new house. That's part of the process. And I remember when I was in the notary in Providencia in Santiago, asking the notary, who has to sit there and witness all of this as he dictates me the text, or rather his assistant dictated the text, but he had to be there. I asked, do many people have trouble with this dictation? And he said, yes, many spelling mistakes and other problems with writing, but they do produce some sort of thing. And my job is to make sure that it can be read in some fashion afterwards, and then I sign off on it.
That's it. So we're almost back to the kind of village letter writer. I mean, we're not that far removed from it, are we? You know, the one person in the village.
Yeah, a very strange practice.
I'm sure if we had time to investigate the pedigree of notaries, that would probably be it, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Anyway, but we mustn't linger on this subject. So there was something special about the notary that notarized the election application of this candidate. What was it?
Oh, yes. Well, you have to have, I believe it's 24,000 signatures of citizens or persons on the electoral roll in order to enroll as a candidate, obviously to prevent totally vexatious candidatures coming through. Candidacies, I guess we would say in English. And in this case, the notary had distinguished himself, given that he had been dead for, I believe, 4 years prior to notarizing many of the signatures on behalf of the candidate Diego Ancalao. Diego Ancalao, that's a Mapuche surname, is associated with a non-political party that we have, which is called Lista del Pueblo, that did very well in the Constitutional Convention that we'll cover very shortly in our exciting political mini-series here.
That's right. So Lista del Pueblo just means list of the people, literally. And it's one of those names, you know, showing that I'm a man of the people type names, which are popular on the left, aren't they?
Yes, and unusually they refuse to register as a political party so far. So they've been looking at ways to present an independent candidate who is obviously affiliated with them. Lista del Pueblo has a very proletarian vibe, or in Chile we would say middle class vibe.
Just to remind our listeners that I think middle class is defined as anybody earning, what's it, sort of more than sort of, you know, sort of $80 a week, or no, a bit more than that. But it is like if you earn $100 a week, you're middle class kind of thing, right?
Yes.
I think that's
yes, you would certainly call it middle class,
it's
emerging middle class, but middle class.
The bar is set fairly low for middle class. Yeah.
And if you're below that, you are most vulnerable. That's our official language.
There's officially no working class. You go straight from most vulnerable to middle class.
Yes. And Lista del Pueblo seems to have a fair bit of support for not being a political party, but it's becoming more and more obvious that it may well be a political party. And some of its potential clientele may be cottoning on to that. But poor Diego could not find 24,000 credible signatures despite the organizational capacity of Lista del Pueblo. Perhaps that's a ploy to prove that this is not business as usual political party.
It's a very convoluted one. Also, it meant the candidate couldn't actually stand, so that's probably slightly counterproductive.
Yes, he's been blocked. He's been blocked.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so he's out. So we shan't linger too long on poor old Diego. And who else is out for technical reasons or for?
Then we have a slightly eccentric candidate, Gino or Hino Lorenzini, and he was trying to run as an independent as well. Running as an independent has the advantage of not having to go through all of the requirements of a political party, which obviously has to have registered rules and statutes in terms of its political status. But he had a problem. To run as an independent, you are supposed to have 12 months without any affiliation with a political party. And he actually political party in the previous year, for some of the time anyway, with another group, which is called Party of the People, not to be confused with List of the People. And in Spanish, we don't confuse it because this is Partido de la Gente. Gente and pueblo, which both mean people, very warm words to Spanish speakers. I think it means the right kind of person. When we say popular in Spanish, it doesn't mean popular the way we use it rather euphemistically in English, in a sense, don't we? Popular means with some kind of market appeal, some kind of ongoing market appeal, whereas popular simply means of the people.
It just means of the people. And just to get this difference between gente and pueblo, so gente is people as in the plural of person, and pueblo is the word people whose plural is peoples, as in the peoples of the world.
Yes, los pueblos. You can say gentes, and it's got a certain meaning. It means sort of clans. The Victor Jara translation of the classic Malvina Reynolds song, Little Boxes, contains this word gentes, which means the little clans.
That's right.
Y las gentes en las casitas.
That's right. Anyway,
that's a fairly
let us now move on from say these two who are totally out, and others have gone out simply by sort of not getting the nomination or whatever.
Yes, well, we can't go through all the ones who were knocked out during the processes of primaries, party primaries, and in one case, in the case of what we call the ex-concertación, which was the centrist, centre-left grouping that ruled for 20 years after the return of electoral rule in 1990. They couldn't even organise a primary, so they had a citizenly consultation instead, with subject to other statutes. It gets very complicated with Serval and the political parties. But there are a few candidates who did not turn up because they declined to. And the most interesting of those would be the current president. She's 35 years old, which is, like in the United States, is the minimum age to become president of Chile. And her name is Izquierda Ziches. She's studied at USACH, the Universidad de Santiago, which is a traditionally sort of technologically focused proletarian institution. It used to be called the School of Arts and Crafts, actually. Had another name before that. It actually dates from the end of the colonial period. And she's a very charismatic figure.
I think I thought you said she was the current president. No, what did you say?
She's the current president of the Medical Association.
Of the Medical Association, right.
Yes, we might be dropping out here through our amazing technological trans-Andean broadcast. And she is wildly popular. She was seen as an excellent communicator during the coronavirus pandemia. She's young. She's of, I believe, Diaguita descent, one of the original peoples of Chile. Comes from a very middle-class background, and she may well be biding her time. She was in the Communist Youth, but is no longer affiliated with any political party. She would be a very viable candidate now or in the future, for sure, but doesn't want to run. And you do wonder who would want to run. It's going to be hard for whoever does become president. Another one we mentioned in our previous exploration is Pamela Giles. And Pamela Giles is a media personality. She does a kind of cheeky feminism line. She speaks her mind. She had a certain amount of popularity. Her partner ran for governor of Bio Bio. It's the first time this year that the governors were elected by people in the different regions. And her partner drew a huge amount of flack for irregularities in his campaign, and that damaged her campaign in time, as well as some of the things that she said, which were simply too over the top. So Pamela Giles has faded from view. And last but not least, we should mention there's an interesting mechanism in place, which is that there are no consecutive terms in Chile. In some places, there's a term limit, like in the United States.
And here it's no.
But in Chile,
so you can stand as many times as you like, just not consecutively.
Not consecutively. So you have to wait 4 years. Now, the most remarkable thing about the first Michelle Bachelet presidency was that her performance was so divisive that Sebastián Piñera became viable and became for the first time president in 2011, beginning of 2011. Or was it 2010? I think it was 2010 he became president. And his greatest achievement was, of course, he was so divisive that Michelle Bachelet became viable again for her second term from 2006. I want to say 2016. Am I right there? Yes, 2014. 2014.
Yes, that's 4 years.
2014.
Yeah.
And after her performance the second time, which was even worse than her performance the first time, what do you know? Sebastián Piñera came back. And I don't know if Sebastián Piñera has been as bad as he was the first time, but the country has certainly had more problems than it did in the beginning of the 2010s.
The first time round, he was able to ride a commodity boom, wasn't he? A big commodity boom. So that when he was standing again, he was able to say, you know, during my first term, there was very fast growth. They had, what it was 5% a year or something, I can't remember. He was able to point to this very fast growth in his first term.
Yes.
Saying that I was much maligned, you know, I delivered this fast growth, which was then, you know, ran away into the sand. But of course, it had just been a worldwide commodity boom. No credit to him, really, unfortunately. So he was not able to repeat this the same trick, was he?
Yes, he made a lot of unforced errors, which are covered in the Clinic satirical magazine as Piñeri cosas, or Piñeri cosas.
Piñeri stuff,
right. Yes. You know, such as falling over and simply misspeaking. This time, he started out in 2019 with a grand statesman-like gesture of going to the Colombian border with Venezuela. Chile has no border with either of those countries. It's many thousands of kilometers away.
And so he could perfectly well have just stayed out of the whole thing.
Yes. As a grand statesman of the region, with the highly unpopular Colombian president, Ivan Duque, essentially to protest the goings-on in Venezuela, which of course are terrible, but whether the president of Chile has anything legitimate to say about it is another question. Now, the jury is out about how much Venezuelan intervention there was in Chile's so-called estallido social, its social splintering, if you like, at the end of 2019. But it was certainly a very, very stupid thing to do, a massively stupid thing to do. And Piñera has been plagued with obstructionism from the Congress, but also a lack of a coherent program. Chile hasn't done bad at all with the pandemia, but the political messaging and the functioning of the Piñera government has been terrible. So technically speaking, even though Piñera could not be re-elected, as there are no consecutive terms and he would never be elected, I don't think he'll be elected anytime in the future, Bachelet could be elected. And she did decline it. There was talk about this for quite a long time, but she was seen as a viable centrist candidate because there is simply no talent in that centrist space that was so well run, so run in such a disciplined way for the 20 years after the return to democracy.
Got it. So in hindsight, she now looks like a kind of big beast, or a kind of political colossus.
And she's in the United Nations movement. She ran the United Nations women's section between her two presidencies, and she's now the United Nations human rights czarina, and she goes around the world dealing with these very difficult human rights cases. Also has to deal with the Chilean human rights industry, which is very, very enterprising. And some of its claims are not, for contemporary events, are nowhere near as pressing as in other areas. But she still has sufficient fan base, and the candidates who have come forth are still sufficiently beatable by someone like her, that even though she was highly unsuccessful the last time, she would be quite viable, but she's declined to run, and so everyone was quite to run.
Okay, so that probably wraps up our little rundown of people who are not running, I think.
Yes, and next up, those who are.
Okay, so, well, apologies for the slightly dodgy quality, picture and sound quality, but I hope we will still see you next time here on Chile Talk.
Ciao.